Let me tell you about Fenwick Drum, because almost nobody at the mess ever bothered. I shared a table with him for 3 years. I ate beside him twice a week at the long white linen tables of the Aldenmere Guards mess hall, under the portraits of colonels nobody alive had met, beneath the regimental silver that smelled faintly of polish and old ceremony. I passed him the bread. I watched him eat with the same unhurried economy he brought to everything, fork lifted, fork lowered, no wasted motion, no comment on the food. In 3 years I never heard him complain about a meal, a duty roster, or a man. In 3 years I heard him say a great deal by saying almost nothing at all. What I also watched, and what I am not proud to have watched without intervening sooner, was what the others did to him. I want to be exact about what I mean. No one struck Fenwick Drum. No one filed a formal complaint against him or made a scene in front of the colonel. It was quieter than that, and in my experience the quiet kind is often worse, because it never collects into a single moment you can point to. It is a tone of voice. It is a name spoken with just enough levity to pass for banter. Drum the Dull, they called him, or simply the Dullard. And the man who first said it smiled when he said it, as though it were affectionate. It is the way a conversation closes when a particular man walks toward it. The small pivot of shoulders, the resumed laughter that comes a beat too quickly after he has passed. The officer at the center of it was a lieutenant named Caro. He was young, well-connected in the way that certain young officers are well-connected. You could hear his family's money in the cadence of his voice, and he had decided early that Drum was beneath his notice. That decision, once made, became permission for the others to follow. I had seen it work that way before. Caro did not shout. He asked questions. "Drum," he would say, across the table, in the pleasant voice of a man genuinely curious, "where exactly did you serve before the regiment? I can never quite remember." Drum would look at him. "Various postings, sir." "Various," Caro would nod, as though this confirmed something. "And you found your way here from various postings. Remarkable." And he would turn back to his own conversation, and the table would continue, and Drum would return to his food, and that would be the end of it. Except that it was never the end of it, because Caro would do the same thing the following week, with the same pleasant voice, and the slight at the core of it. That Drum was a man without a history worth mentioning, accumulated slowly, like water finding the lowest point in a room. What I want to say, and what I had no language for at the time, is that Drum never rose to any of it. He answered when he was spoken to. He performed his duties with a precision that would have been remarked upon if remarked upon things had been the currency Caro traded in. He stood his post outside the forecourt gates through weather that drove other men to complaints they later regretted. He held the rifle and the bearing and the stillness with the ease of a man who has done the same thing so many times that the effort of it has become invisible, even to himself. What he did not do, ever, was explain himself. He did not defend his record. He did not drop hints. He wore one row of dress ribbons on his tunic, the standard campaign and service decorations that most men in the regiment carried, and he wore them without ceremony, and that was what everyone saw. I noticed something, though. I had been watching him long enough to notice things. Underneath the tunic, pressed against his chest, beneath the wool, not displayed, not mentioned, there was a faint shape, a hard edge. Whatever it was not standard issue, and it was not on the outside where anyone could see it. I had looked at it for 3 months and told myself I was imagining things, and then told myself it was none of my business, and then told myself that, whatever it was, Drum clearly intended for it to remain invisible, and I should respect that intention. The formal mess dinner fell on a Thursday in November. It was the regimental anniversary, which meant dress uniforms and candlelight, and the long white table set with the silver the adjutant polished personally the night before. It meant the colonel would be present, Colonel Wraith, who was a compact and deliberate man in his mid-50s, a man who had come up through the regiment the slow way and wore that fact without apology. Regimental dinners had a particular formality to them. Men sat in their assigned places, speeches were made at intervals, port was passed to the left, and a kind of temporary equality descended on the proceedings. A suspension, for one evening, of the daily order. Drum sat 3 places to my left. Caro was across the table and slightly down from us. The dinner had reached the point after the main course where men loosened slightly. The port had made its second circuit, the candles had burned an inch lower, and conversation broke into smaller tributary streams, each table finding its own. Caro found his. "Drum," he said, and the table quieted in that particular way that a table quiets when it knows something is coming. "I've been thinking about you." Drum set his glass down. "Sir. 3 years now, isn't it? 3 years in the regiment and we still don't know your story." Caro looked around the table as though inviting agreement, and 2 or 3 men provided it with small sounds that were not quite laughter. "I feel that's a gap. A man ought to have a story. What were you before this? Before," he gestured vaguely at the dining hall, the candlelight, the portraits, "before all this ceremony." "A soldier, sir." "Yes, yes, of course, but what kind? Where?" Caro leaned back. "I'm asking in good faith, Drum. We'd like to know the man we're sitting with." This is the moment I want to describe with precision, because I have thought about it many times since. Drum looked at Caro for what I would estimate was 4 full seconds, not aggressively, not with the look of a man preparing a countermove. He looked at him the way he looked at everything, steadily, from behind a face that had been trained for 11 years to remain still no matter what approached it. Then he said, quietly, "I don't think that's required, sir." Caro's eyes sharpened. "I beg your pardon." "My record is held by the regiment, sir. The colonel has access to it. I don't believe the dinner table is the right venue for its contents." He picked up his glass again. "But thank you for your interest." It was the most Drum had said at any mess dinner in 3 years, and the table was very quiet when he finished. Caro's jaw moved once, then settled. He did not pursue it. There was something in the delivery, not insolence, not challenge, but a quality of absolute finality that made pursuit feel like a poor idea. The conversation moved on. Drum returned to his port. But I was watching the colonel. Wraith had been seated at the head of his own table, 3 yards away, and I could not have said with certainty that he had heard the exchange. He was in his own conversation with the adjutant and 2 of the senior captains, but at some point during Caro's questioning, Wraith had become very still, in the way that senior men become still when they are listening to something they were not invited to listen to. And when Drum delivered his reply, something crossed the colonel's face that I had no name for at the time. Not anger, not amusement exactly, something closer to recognition. He let 20 minutes pass. The dessert came and went. The port finished its 3rd circuit. Then Wraith rose, which was the signal for the room to quiet, and he raised his glass for the regimental toast, which we gave, and then he remained standing after the toast, which was unusual. "Gentlemen," he said, "I am going to read something." He reached into his breast pocket and produced a single folded sheet, which he opened without haste. "This is not standard practice for a mess dinner. I'm making an exception this evening because it has come to my attention," and here he looked briefly, not at Caro, not at Drum, but at the middle distance in the way of a man choosing his words with care, "that a member of this regiment has been carrying something for 3 years that his comrades might benefit from knowing about. The decoration in question is held in a classified addendum to his service record. He has not mentioned it. He was not required to. That is, in point of fact, consistent with the terms under which it was awarded." He began to read. I will not reproduce the full citation. It covered 11 lines on the page that Wraith held, and he read every one of them without raising his voice. What it described had taken place 7 years before Drum arrived at the regiment, at a position in a mountain range in a country I had heard of but never visited, during an operation that had not been publicized and would not be. What Drum had done on a hillside at 3 in the morning, in weather that Wraith's measured voice described as extreme and sustained, with equipment that had partially failed, on behalf of 4 men who were subsequently recovered and who are alive today, what he had done was not the sort of thing that lends itself to summary. The citation tried. Citations always try. When Wraith finished reading, he folded the paper and returned it to his pocket. "Corporal Drum," he said, "will you stand?" Drum stood. He did not look around the room. He looked at the colonel at the middle distance, at the same point in the air that men on ceremonial post have looked at for as long as there have been posts to stand. Colonel Wraith said, "The regiment is in your debt." And then Wraith sat down, and then, table by table, one after another with no signal given and no instruction offered, every man in the mess dining hall of the Aldenmere Guards rose to his feet, including me, including the men at Caro's end of the table, who got up more slowly than the others, but got up. I watched Drum through all of this. His expression did not change. He waited a measured interval long enough to honor the gesture, short enough to signal that he did not intend to perform anything in return, and then he nodded once and sat down and picked up his glass. I looked at Caro. I'm not sure what I expected to see. He was standing with the rest of us, and his face had the look of a man who has been shown something he cannot immediately account for, not shame, exactly, not yet, but the precursor of it. The dawning of a calculation he had been running for 3 years on bad data. He did not look at Drum. Drum did not look at him. When the dinner ended and the men filtered out into the anteroom and the autumn cold of the corridor beyond, I stayed at the table longer than I needed to. I watched Drum set down his napkin in the precise way that he set everything down, folded once, placed parallel to the edge of the table, and rise from his chair. He tucked it in behind him. He straightened his tunic. I caught up to him in the corridor. "Drum," I said. He looked at me. "How long have you been carrying that?" I meant the decoration, the thing beneath the tunic. He considered the question with the same patience he brought to all questions. "Since they gave it to me," he said. And then, after a pause that I would characterize as the closest Fenwick Drum ever came to dry humor, seemed like the right place for it. He buttoned his coat against the cold. "They'll treat you differently now," I said. It came out sounding more like a question than I intended. Drum looked down the corridor toward the guardroom and the post beyond it. "They'll treat me however they treat me," he said. "I'll do the same job either way." He turned and walked back toward the gate. I watched him go, the unhurried stride, the straight back, the particular quality of a man who has decided what he is and requires no audience for it. He passed through the arch at the end of the corridor, and I heard his footsteps on the cobblestones, and then I didn't hear anything. Caro requested a transfer to another posting the following spring. The application cited professional development. No one who had been in the mess that Thursday mentioned it in connection with the dinner, but I was not the only man who made the connection privately. Drum remained at his post. He stood it the same way he had always stood it, through the same weather, in the same tunic, with the same expression that gave you nothing and asked you for nothing in return. He never spoke about the citation. As far as I know, he never told anyone the details the colonel had read aloud, and if men in the regiment looked at him differently after that night, and they did, I can tell you that plainly, they did. Drum himself seemed not to notice, or not to care, which in his case amounted to the same thing. He had carried the truth of himself quietly for 3 years in a room full of men who had decided, without asking, that there was nothing there worth knowing. He had let them be wrong. And then he had gone back to his post, because that was what the post required, and Fenwick Drum was a man who understood requirements.